brand? Do they have kind of something that they're known for? When you think of France, what do you think? What's kind of the brand of French, Mark? Pardon me? French toast. French toast. Bad. That's bad. When you think of France, what is there something comes to mind? Pardon me? They don't bathe? I'm not sure I want to go down this road. I think we'll just dive into the. What about Italians? Italy? Pizza. What about England? Pardon me? Bland food. we're here. Surely along she could give us some. Second, you got the drift here. Second question: Do nations influence one another? How do nations influence one another? And separate from immigration and people moving back and forth, how do they influence one another? Pardon me? Yeah. Yeah, there are a number of alliances, some of which change overnight. But does what happens in America, in terms of the culture, the change in culture, does that influence other nations? Well, sometimes they didn't used to, and it kind of depends on, who's the head of the country and that sort of thing. Some people come bring their own culture. Yeah. Right. So there are nations do influence one another, and notwithstanding immigration, notwithstanding war, but there's just an influence now. During the time of Solomon, do you suppose Israel influenced other nations? Can you think of an example of how, at least one incident of how Israel influenced another nation? When the Queen of Sheba came to check things out, she had heard about Israel. She had heard about Solomon. And how many miles away did she live? It wasn't a short trip. It wasn't a trip to Chillicothe, Yeah. Now, when you think about it, didn't God expect Israel to be a leavening influence on the other nations? That was kind of an expectation, wasn't it? That Israel was to be righteous, it was to be a just, compassionate nation. It was to be a nation that had high moral standards, where there was compassion one for another and that sort of thing. So, that would have been an expectation. God would have expected Israel to be to set a standard, an influence for good. Now, And at times I believe Israel was a kind of a standard for the other nations. But in chapter 4, and in previous chapters here in the book of Jeremiah, they weren't much of a standard. In fact, in chapter 4, we're going to see God tells Jeremiah to go out among the people and see if he can find a righteous person. See if he can find one. Well, we'll see what, we'll look at that as we go here. Well, in chapter 4 of Jeremiah, if thou wilt return, O Israel, saith the Lord, return unto me. Now that little word if thou wilt return, Israel vacillated, both northern Israel and southern Israel. They vacillated between, sometimes they'd make some improvements and kind of turn back to God, and then they'd go the other direction. If thou wilt return, O Israel, saith the Lord, return unto me, if thou wilt, put away thine abominations out of my sight, and then shalt thou not be removed. Now, God says, even at this stage in history, you repent, you put away your abominations, get rid of that debauchery, and what's going to happen? Then shalt thou not what? Be removed. Isn't that something? If you just straighten up, then there would be at least a delay in the Babylonian captivity. In verse 2, and thou shalt swear. Now it's just not a matter of just straightening up. It's a matter, and thou shalt swear. Now, the atheists have a kind of a slogan now. Atheism is becoming aggressive. Those that endorse in our country, that endorse sinful stuff, are becoming aggressive. They're evangelizing. I mean, they're pushing their agenda. They're really pushing their agenda. And so there's this idea among the atheists that, good without God. We are good without God. We're going to demonstrate to the world that we, the atheists, we're good without God. You don't need to have God to be good. The kind of philosophy. Well, so it's more than just straightening up. It was a matter of the Lord liveth in truth. Now, there are a lot of good people, really good people, as we define good in terms of being civil, being nice, being compassionate, being helping neighbors and that sort of thing. A lot of good people that don't acknowledge God. They're good. They're worthy of heaven because they're good, but they don't necessarily honor God. But here the prophet says, you not only straighten up and get rid of the abominations, but thou shalt swear. Thou shalt. What's it mean to swear? It means to enter into a covenant relationship, an oath. People take an oath, and when they take the oath, the politicians take an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States. If it's Ohio, the Constitution of Ohio and the Constitution of the United States take an oath. That's a pledge. It's a commitment. Some of the politicians need to get that out every morning and kind of recheck their oath. And thou shalt swear, take an oath, that the Lord liveth in truth. The Lord liveth. The Lord is alive. The Lord is truth. That's the standard. He provides a standard of truth. Accept his judgment in judgment, and in righteousness, not only getting rid of the abomination, but do something that is helpful, useful, and the nations shall bless themselves in him, and in him shall they glory. So, I think what he's saying here is where we began our discussion this morning, that if they would do this, if they would make a turnabout, and God would bless them, then wouldn't the other nations observe what's going on? Well, obviously, they would observe what's going on. Did the nations, when the children of Israel crossed the Jordan into the land of Jericho, the people of Jericho knew something about what happened in the wilderness with the Jews, right? Rahab knew that there was something going on there. I mean, how did Rahab become converted? Huh? Well, that was an evidence of her, Yeah. And somehow she, before those spies came to Rahab, her house was on the wall. Rahab wasn't necessarily a Sunday school girl, right? I mean, her reputation wasn't all that great. But when they came there, the spies came there, she had heard about what was going on. And probably without any specific interaction with Jews, she was influenced by that Jewish nation. Right? When Ruth abandoned the religion of the Moabites, and came with her mother-in-law, she was influenced by, obviously, the Jewish nation, and wanted to be a part of that Jewish culture, that Jewish nation. And did the Jews have some proselytes? Well, yeah, we know that. Don't you suppose that there were some people from other nations that thought, they looked around at their own condition, their own situation, their own culture, and decided, I want to be a part of that Jewish community. I want to become Jewish in terms of the religion. They couldn't in terms of nationality or in terms of race, but they could in terms of the religion. And so if those Jews, even at that late date, if they would have repented and acknowledged God in truth and righteousness, and they would be that influence would carry across the borders of the Judean territory. Then in verse 3, for thus saith the Lord to the men of Judah and Jerusalem, break up your fallow ground and sow not among the thorns. Now, we've got to have some farmers here to understand that. What's this breaking up the fallow ground? Huh? Got to till it up. Fallow ground is not been. It's just kind of out there laying. Now, if you don't till it up, and you go out and start throwing seeds around, what happens? Birds come and eat the seeds, or they don't germinate, right? So he's using a metaphor here. You Jews are like fallow ground. There's nothing good can grow there. There's nothing good that can grow in you as Jews or as a nation. Got to break it up and allow the seed, the word, God's word, to enter your being, enter the ground, being the individual Jewish people. So you got to break up the fallow ground. Fallow, just it's ground that's been laying there. By the way, if you just leave land go and don't cultivate it, and you're near woods, forest area, what happens? Trees take over. You know, it's not good for crop production. And then he says, now he sees, here's another metaphor. Circumcise yourselves to the Lord and take away the foreskin of your heart. Now circumcision was a kind of a, was a symbol that you're a Jew. Circumcision was associated with the Jews. That was their rite of passage, so to speak, to the Jewish community. And now I'm saying, now circumcise your hearts. Now, cut away what? Cut away immoral stuff. Cut away all kinds of debauchery. Cut away, you got to circumcise it, scalp it, get rid of it. Maybe you need a meat cleaver in some cases to get rid of it, rather than a little scalpel. Circumcise your heart. So he says, he's using these metaphors. They knew about circumcision, they knew about fallow ground, and they applied it to them as individuals and as a nation. Circumcise yourselves to the Lord and take away the foreskin of your heart, ye men of Judah and inhabitants of Jerusalem. Now, he's really focusing in on Jerusalem. Now, Judah, they had cities around about Jerusalem, or villages around about Jerusalem. But he's speaking directly to these Jews that were about to be massacred by the Babylonian army. He says you better do it, or what's the situation? Lest my fury come forth like fire and burn that none can quench it. Unquenchable fire coming. Nothing was going to stop this Babylonian army. They were coming and they were going to destroy. And there wasn't anything that, just like the fires in California, with all the technology that's available, thousands of acres are being burned, kind of like it can't be stopped. Burn that none can quench it because of the evil of your doings. And then Jeremiah keeps relating this. Your evil has caused this fury, fire fury. Declare ye in Judah and publish in Jerusalem. Declare ye in Judah and publish in Jerusalem, and say, blow ye the trumpet in the land. Now Jeremiah is thinking about, and he's talking about this fury that's going to come. You see, and he's contemplating this. Now, if we just knew that, boy, some foreign nation is coming after us, if we just knew that, and Jeremiah just knew it, wouldn't that shake us up? I mean, that would just shake us up to the core. We'd go to bed at night thinking about that, get up in the morning and think about it if you could get any sleep, you see. Jeremiah, he knew this was going to happen, and I'm sure it bothered him, but it didn't bother a lot of those Jews, most of the Jews. And why didn't it bother them? Well, they had their own set of prophets. They had false prophets saying, hey, peace, everything's fine. Don't worry about this. The Babylonians can't deal with us. We're God's chosen people, even though they were, bad folks. So, the false prophet is saying, everything's fine. No problem whatsoever. No problem. But he says, he can just, Jeremiah can just see this coming. Blow ye the trumpet in the land. He's describing what's going to happen. And cry together, gather together and say, assemble yourselves and let us go into the defended cities. Of course, this is what would happen. You see the army of the Babylonians coming, and those people that are out in the rural areas and out the villages around about Jerusalem, man, they're going to be scattering. Where are they going to head? They're going to head to some, either they're going to head into some caves into the wilderness, or they're going to go into Jerusalem, in a walled city. And you can imagine people migrating, and Jeremiah is saying this, people are going to be migrating to the walled city, or into the defended cities. What's a defended city? One that has walls, one that has protection, and probably one that has an army. At least guards. Set up the standard toward Zion. Set up the standard toward Zion. He could see this. Jeremiah could see it. What's the standard here? The battle flag. That was the standard, and that he could just see that the flag preceding the army, giving, I guess, even direction to the army. Set up the standard toward Jerusalem. They were headed, he could see in his mind them headed toward Jerusalem. Retire and stay not, for I will bring evil from the north and a great destruction. Now, the north, well, who was in the north? The Babylonians. The Assyrians, the Assyrian Empire, which lasted, Mark, you said how long that Assyrian Empire, you're in your Wednesday night class? 100? 300 years? 3? In the range of 300 years. Here's the Assyrian Empire. I suppose some Jews were thinking, hey, the Babylonians are threatening us, but that's the Assyrian Empire, But the Assyrian Empire was crumbling, and as God predicted, as prophesied in Daniel, the Babylonian Empire was going to be a world empire. And so the Babylonians were on their way. In Jeremiah's mind, they were on their way, and he could just visualize the great destruction that was taking place. The scorched earth policy wasn't invented by the people for Desert Storm. That scorched earth policy was a strategy in the Old Testament era. I mean, scorched earth, gone. I mean, it was a complete devastation. Now think about this, and we'll talk about this a little later. How did God describe the Jerusalem area when he was talking to Moses about bringing the children of Israel into this land across the Jordan? How did he describe that? A land that flowed with, Now, milk and honey. Conjure up in your mind a land that flows with milk and honey. Bees. That means blossoms. That means crops. That means, what all does that mean? Honey. What is milk? That means livestock. It means, this is really good. And now, here Jeremiah is visualizing, wow, scorched earth, crops destroyed, water wells filled, just total destruction, taking away the very needs for living, for sustaining life. And the lion is come up from his thicket. The lion was a symbol of Babylon. And the destroyer of the Gentiles is on his way. What about the destroyer of the Gentiles? Well, in order for Babylon to come to power, what did they have to do with other nations? Destroy them, conquer them, take them over, you see. So, it was this outfit that was coming in was a destroyer of nations. A destroyer of the Gentiles is on his way. Jeremiah could see in his own mind, he could just see these hordes, this horrific army coming. And he's gone forth in his place to make thy land desolate. That was his purpose. They would destroy the land, desolate. Nothing there. The barns torn down, the houses torn down, the crops destroyed totally. And thy cities shall be laid waste without an inhabitant. Now you talk about total destruction. Laid waste, people gone. Just that's a picture of total destruction. For this, he says in verse 8, gird ye with sackcloth. Now he's saying, he's saying to these people, this is complete destruction, desolation is coming. Now, you've tried, and I'm just kind of filling in the blanks here. You've tried to have an alliance with Syria. You've tried to have an alliance with Egypt to help protect you. You've been sending, envoys to Babylon to, kind of make peace and that sort of thing. And it's not working. It hasn't worked. They're coming after us. So the only thing you can do here is, for this, gird yourself with sackcloth. That's a sign of what? Humility, a sign of penitence. Lament and howl, for the fierce anger of the Lord is not turned back from us. Now, I'm sure that Jeremiah was saying to those people, look, God is angry with us because of our sin. God is angry, and God is using Babylon. God is using this nation to destroy us. And in our Wednesday night class, and I don't want to get into too much into the Wednesday night class, but Mark is talking about the period of time between the Testaments, and I raised the question, and something for us all to think about, I think, is, did God merely, when he had this, in Nebuchadnezzar's period of time, when Nebuchadnezzar dreamed about the head of gold and told Nebuchadnezzar, the Assyrian or the Babylonian, that he was the head of gold, and then there would be silver. This image would have a silver of the arms and chest, and then the which represent the Grecian Empire, and then the Roman Empire. The question is, did God in fact orchestrate all this, or did he merely predict all of this? Did he obviously prophesied that the Babylonian Empire would be one, and the Grecian and the Roman, following the Babylonian, the Medo-Persian, and then the Grecian, and then the Roman Empire. Did God arrange all these empires, or did he merely prophesy it? Now, the end result probably doesn't make a difference as to whether he orchestrated or predicted. It happened. And so we then have the fulfillment here of the Babylonian Empire and how it affected Jerusalem, Judea. And the Assyrians had already carried away the northern tribes of Israel. So he's they're really in a world of hurt. Verse 9, and it shall come to pass at that day, saith the Lord, that the heart of the kings shall perish, and the heart of the princes and the priests shall be astonished, and the prophets shall wonder. When that day comes forth, that is when the Babylonians come in, the big shots, the priests, the kings, the princes, the ruling class, they're going to be astonished. See, these are the people who thought, well, this could never happen. Nothing can happen to us. We're formidable. And besides that, they had in mind that God was on their side. Well, when this comes to pass, the people, the false prophets, the false and the princes and the false priests, they're going to be astonished and shall wonder. And then Jeremiah kind of says, then saith I, O Lord God, surely thou hast greatly deceived the people in Jerusalem, saying, you shall have peace, whereas the sword reacheth unto the soul. Let me read that again. Let that sink in. Then said I, Lord God, surely thou hast greatly deceived the people in Jerusalem, saying, ye shall have peace, whereas the sword reacheth unto the soul. Now that reads as though God deceived the people. Is that right? I mean, if you just read it without kind of understanding anything else. But what do we know about God? Did he ever deceive anybody? Did he ever deceive the people? Did he ever deceive the nation? I kind of think it's Jeremiah's thinking, I'm out here preaching, and I'm out here warning the people, and God, you've inspired me, and I'm warning them, and I'm prophesying, and they're not listening, but they're listening to these false prophets. And I think Jeremiah's kind of saying, God, why didn't you force these people to accept what I'm doing, my words? I think he's saying, why didn't you influence these people to accept the words that I'm giving you? I am telling them exactly what you said for me to tell them. And yet they won't accept it, but they accept the words of the false prophets. I think that's what this is all about. God didn't deceive them. But God allowed them to use their own judgment, and God allowed them to accept the words of the false prophets as opposed to the word. Mark, can you explain that any further? Yeah. Yeah. they were so far gone that God just, okay, go at it. You're going to suffer for it, but just go. He said here, verse 11, at that time shall it be said to this people and to Jerusalem, a dry wind of high places in the wilderness toward the daughter of my people, not a fan, nor to cleanse. Even a full wind from those places shall come unto me. Now also will I give sentence against thee. Now, he's using the wind here to describe how the, to get people thinking about the destruction that was going to come upon them. He's using the wind. Now, this wind that he's talking about was a dry, high velocity wind that was very uncomfortable. I don't know. Does anybody know anything about those Santa Ana winds in California? I mean, they're pretty bad, aren't they? Are they hot? Well, at least they drive the forest fires out there. Now, the wind itself was a good thing. How did they thrash when they were thrashing grain on the thrashing floor? The breeze, the breeze got rid of the chaff. On a hot summer day, a nice breeze is a good thing. But this wind was a bad thing. And that's kind of the metaphor for how bad it was going to be when these Babylonians came along. In verse 13, behold, he shall come up as the clouds, and his chariots shall be as whirlwind, describing the forces, the army of Babylonia. And his horses are swifter than eagles. Woe unto us, for we are spoiled. Now, he's using the whirlwinds here as a description of how bad this assault would be when the Babylonians came. Verse 14, O Jerusalem, wash thine heart from wickedness. Now, he's saying to the folks, here's what's going to happen. Now, however, you wash thine heart from wickedness, that thou mayest be saved. She says there's a way. He's saying there's a way out of this, and that the way out is to get rid of wickedness, and to, as he said earlier here in the chapter, and to be accept God in His righteousness. Woe unto us, we are spoiled. Then, O Jerusalem, wash thine heart from wickedness, that thou mayest be saved. How long shall thy vain thoughts lodge within thee? Their philosophy, their idolatry, their corruption. How long? He's saying, how long shall thy vain thoughts lodge within thee? Within their countenance, their very inner being. Then he says, he goes back to this description. For a voice declareth from Dan, and publisheth affliction from Mount Ephraim. What's the location of Dan in relation to the tribe of Dan? The tribes were divided. The territory of Israel, the Palestinian territory, was divided among the tribes of Israel, and they had their borders right up in the north. So what's that mean? Pardon me? Okay, so he says, they're already up there. The army's already up there. They're not going to turn around and go home. They're coming for us. And he says, you better get you straightened up. For a voice declareth from Dan, and publisheth affliction from Mount Ephraim. Make ye mention to the nations. Behold, publish against Jerusalem, that watchers come from a far country. It's known among the nations. The nations, nations have spies. Is our government the first group that has ever had spies? We got spies all over the world, and there are spies from other nations in this country. The nations knew what was going on. The various nations knew what Babylon's intentions probably were. Make mention to the nations, behold, publish against Jerusalem, that the watchers come from a far country, and give out their voice against the cities of Judah. The watchers. Watchers, in some respects, were prison guards. Okay? Now, Jeremiah is saying we got people outside of Jerusalem watching. They're watching the comings and goings of people. They're no doubt sending messages back to the army headquarters about what's going on here. I mean, what is happening? What are they doing? Where's their most vulnerable, what's their most vulnerable situation? How can we scale the walls? How can we get into the city? The watchers come from a far country and give their voice against the cities of Judah. And keepers of a field are they against her round about. The people that were, in the vineyards, in the fields, they knew what was going on. The keeper's field are they against her round about, because she hath been rebellious against me, saith the Lord. Thy ways, is that the bell? Not yet. I guess just, thy ways and thy doings have procured these things unto thee. This is thy wickedness, because it is bitter, because it reaches unto mine heart. Let's just stop there and pick up in verse 19 next week. Verse 19.